Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are we're stepping right into the middle of what I can only really call a corporate war zone.
Yeah, that is definitely not an overstatement. It's probably the biggest story in the entertainment industry right now,
Right.
and honestly, maybe the biggest one we've seen in the last decade.
Sure. Because we are talking about a massive media earthquake happening right now in 2026. The prize on the table is Warner Brothers Discovery.
Which is just a massive, massive portfolio.
It's the crown jewels. You've got Batman, you've got Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, CNN. So basically a huge chunk of American pop culture.
Right.
And for a really long time, everybody just assumed this was a done deal.
Right. The prevailing wisdom was always that Netflix would just swoop in, write a giant check, and absorb all that IP.
Yeah, because they have the money.
Exactly. They have the market cap, and they
Yeah.
desperately need that kind of deep legacy library. It just felt like the inevitable end to the streaming wars, you know?
Oh.
The biggest platform buys the biggest library.
But and here is where things get completely wild. The tables have violently. We're looking at a scenario right now that involves corporate raiders, aggressive antitrust probes, and get this direct intervention from the White House.
Yeah, it's a perfect storm. Business, politics, culture, all just colliding. It's not just about who can write the biggest check anymore.
No, it's about leverage. So for you listening, our mission today is to unpack a very specific analysis. We're pulling largely from a breakdown by the channel Clownfish TV, and we're going to look at their sources and their reporting on why Netflix might actually lose this deal.
And we are strictly looking at what their analysis says because it gets into some really heavy political territory.
Exactly. We aren't endorsing any of the politics here from the left or the right.
Sure.
We're just reporting on the Clownfish TV analysis to understand the business dynamics at play. We're looking at why the momentum has shifted to Paramount.
Specifically, the entity led by David Ellison and Skydance.
Right, the Skydance entity. And we're going to dive into the revenge politics that their source claims are suddenly at play.
And ultimately, looking at the existential choice that Hollywood is facing right now. The analysis puts it in incredibly stark terms. They say the industry has to choose between, quote, the Ellisons or oblivion.
The Ellisons or oblivion. That is incredibly dramatic.
It is, but when we really dig into the details today, it might not be an exaggeration.
No, it might be spot on. So let's just start with the odds. Because if you had asked me a month ago, I would have bet my entire house on Netflix winning this bid.
Oh, absolutely. Most of the market would have. But if we look at the newest data coming out of the market analysis, the whole picture has flipped. Paramount is now the statistical favorite to take Warner.
Okay, give us the numbers on that. How big of a swing are we actually talking?
Well, the current analysis from our source material pegs Paramount's chances at 56%.
Okay.
While Netflix has dropped all the way down to a 34% probability, yeah. That is a massive gap. In the M&A world, mergers and acquisitions, where you have arbitrage traders spending millions to model these exact probabilities, a 22-point gap is a chasm. It's huge.
That is a staggering swing in momentum. What is the market actually telling us here? Because, usually the stock market figures this stuff out before the press release drop.
The market reaction has been incredibly telling. Netflix stock has been wildly volatile over this. I mean, it recently hit a 3-year low.
A 3-year low just off rumors.
Yeah. Now, it has seen a slight recovery since then, but that initial massive drop was fueled by a very specific fear from Wall Street, the fear that Netflix won't secure this IP library.
So investors are basically looking at Netflix and saying, if you don't get Batman and Harry Potter, your growth engine completely stalls out.
Precisely. The streaming wars have shifted. It used to be all about acquiring subscribers at any cost, but now it's about retention. You have to keep them from canceling.
Right, the churn.
Yes, churn is the enemy, and there is no content more effective at stopping churn than the Warner Brothers catalog. It's comfort food. It's the stuff people watch on.
Because if you don't have that back catalog, you are forced to just keep spending billions and billions on brand new hits every single month.
Which is a totally unsustainable business model. You can't invent a new Stranger Things.
Okay, so Netflix is sweating. But on the other side of the ring, you have Paramount. And they're not just sitting back waiting for Netflix to stumble. Right?
No, not at all. They are putting very real money. Warner Brothers Discovery shares have seen a completely revised bid from the Paramount and Skydance. They bumped the offer up to $31 a share.
$31 a share. That is a number that is going to force the Warner board to sit up and take this incredibly seriously. Yeah. That's a huge premium over where their stock has been just kind of languishing lately.
It definitely puts a ticking clock on the whole process because if the Warner Brothers board gives Paramount the nod, meaning they accept this as a preliminary offer, Netflix is suddenly shoved into a very, very tight. According to the rules of engagement here, Netflix would only have 4 business day counteroffer.
4 business days. That's nothing in corporate time.
It's basically an eye blink.
Right. You barely have enough time to get the lawyers on the same Zoom call, let alone structure a counterbid worth tens of billions of dollars.
It's a pressure cooker tactic. It is deliberately designed to force the opponent into making an error. And this really brings us to the public posture of the leadership right now. You have Ted Sarandos, the CEO of Netflix.
Yeah.
Historically, when we see these massive media mergers, the CEOs get very emotional, they get competitive. Think back to Disney's Bob Iger bought Fox.
Oh, yeah. Iger paid an absolute fortune for Fox. And looking back, a lot of analysts say he wildly overpaid just to keep it out of the hands of Comcast.
Exactly. It was an emotional defensive move, and it cost Disney dearly. It loaded them up with so much debt that it hamstrung their operation. Ted Sarandos is out there trying to signal to the market that he is not going to make that exact.
Trying to play it cool.
Right. Our source notes that Sarandos has explicitly stated he is, quote, willing to walk away. He says he absolutely will not overpay for Warner Brothers.
But is that just a bluff? I mean, can he realistically afford to walk away? It feels like he's the guy at the poker table acting like he doesn't care about the pot, but his knuckles are completely white.
And that is the multi-billion-dollar question that everyone is asking. The analysis suggests Sarandos is trying to project deep financial distance. He wants the street to think we want this, but not at any price.
But given that 3-year low in the stock market, his own shareholders clearly disagree with him.
Exactly. The shareholders think he has to buy. If Wall Street believes Netflix needs WBD to survive the next decade, then Sarandos saying, I'll walk away doesn't sound like discipline. It sounds like negligence.
It's an insanely high-stakes game of chicken. But while Netflix is hesitating, or at least pretending to hesitate, Paramount is just charging straight ahead. And this aggressive push is really being driven by David Ellison.
David Ellison is the absolute key figure in all of this. He is the head of Skydance, and he is essentially the architect of this entire Paramount bid. And he is not being shy about his intentions at all.
What's his angle?
Well, he wrote a letter to investors recently that the Clownfish TV source broke down, and it is incredibly revealing about his overall philosophy.
What did the letter say?
He specifically described Warner Brothers Discovery as an, quote, accelerant to Paramount's goals.
An accelerant. That's a very specific word choice. It implies that Paramount already has a fire burning, and Warner Brothers is just the gasoline they want to pour on it to make it explode.
That is exactly the pitch he's making to Wall Street. Ellison is arguing that Skydance and Paramount already have a standalone strategy that works. They are already growing. But if you add Warner Brothers to the mix, you speed up their entire timeline by years.
And he has a name for this strategy.
Yeah, he calls it the Paramount One initiative.
Paramount One. It sounds like a secret military project. Mm-hmm. What does it actually mean for the nuts and bolts of the business?
It is all about hyper-unification. Ellison wants to drive a massively unified marketing push around what they call tentpole programming.
Okay, so instead of what they do now.
Right. Right now you have 50 different shows scattered across different platforms with 50 tiny marketing budgets. Ellison wants to stop that. He wants to focus massive, overwhelming resources on just the biggest hit.
So you take the new Mission Impossible or the new Game of Thrones spinoff and you just make them completely undeniable to the public.
Exactly. You push them across every single platform you own simultaneously. Use the broadcast networks, the streaming service, the cable channels, the billboards. Everything fires at once.
Which makes sense. Because as a viewer, we're all just drowning in a sea of content. Half the time, I miss a great show simply because the algorithm didn't show it to me and I had no idea it existed.
And Ellison is basically saying, under Paramount One, you will know our shows exist. You won't be able to.
Okay. But to understand why they need this accelerant, we have to look at the actual financials of the Skydance and Paramount entity as it exists today. Because they just reported their Q4 earnings, and the source points out it paints a very complex picture.
It really does. It's a total mixed bag.
Break down the diagnosis for us. How are they actually looking on paper?
Well, the top line revenue is at $8.14 billion, and that is actually up 2%. So they are showing real growth. But when you look under the hood, it's a tale of two completely different businesses.
I guess. The streaming side is booming, and traditional TV is basically bleeding out, because that seems to be the story for every legacy media.
You hit the nail on the head. Streaming is seeing double-digit growth. It's a rock. But linear TV, which means traditional broadcast networks and cable channels, is facing severe, massive headwinds. It dropped 5% down to $4.7 billion.
A 5% drop. on a $4.7 billion business. That is a massive chunk of revenue just vanishing into thin air.
It hurt. It really hurts the bottom line. And because of that, they reported operating losses of $339 million.
Wow.
Now, in the context of a massive media conglomerate, that size of a loss technically manageable. But Ellison is very carefully framing this to investors as the, quote, cost of the turnaround.
So he's telling them we have to lose money right now to build the machine that will print money for us later.
Exactly. And a huge part of building that efficient machine seems to involve ruthlessly cutting out the parts of the legacy business that just aren't working anymore. The source material gets highly specific about this. And frankly, it's...
Yeah, they use that corporate buzzword operational efficiency, which we all know is just CEO speak for massive budget cuts and layoffs.
Right. But the Clownfish TV analysis gives some incredibly fascinating examples of where these cuts are going to hit, particularly regarding how Paramount has been handling the Star Trek franchise.
Oh, this part really stood out to me in the notes. The source was hypercritical of the recent Star Trek stuff. They specifically called out something about singing, dancing Klingon.
Yes, that was a very pointed critique of the recent creative direction of the franchise. The argument from the source is that under the previous Paramount regime, they were just throwing millions of dollars at weird experimental concepts.
Like putting full-blown musical numbers into Star Trek.
Exactly. And the source argues that stuff like that severely alienated the core loyal fan base. Ellison's new team is supposedly looking at these expensive experiments and saying this is pure waste, not what the audience actually see.
It's a really interesting debate, though. When you own a massive legacy IP and you try to broaden it too much to capture a new demographic, do you end up just losing the people who kept it alive in the first place?
That is exactly the argument Ellison's camp is making. They believe the franchise drifted way too far from its... So the new mandate is less singing Klingons and more traditional, grounded sci-fi.
But it's not just about changing the tone, right? It's about literally producing less stuff.
Correct. If a show isn't performing, it gets the axe. The source specifically mentions that a third season of Starfleet Academy is now deemed unlikely or even, quote, impossible under this new vision.
Ouch. I mean, if you are a huge fan of that specific show, or worse, if you are a writer or crew member working on that show right now, that is a devastating signal to hear.
And it gets even messier. The source brought up a really specific example of how the previous regime completely mishandled Strange New Worlds, which, by the way, is generally considered to be one of the best modern Star Trek shows they have.
Right. The fans actually really like that one. So what did Paramount do to mess it up?
Apparently, they took episodes of this premium flagship show and just dumped them onto a classic channel on Pluto.
Wait. Pluto TV, isn't that their free ad-supported service? The one that's basically designed to feel like old-school cable TV?
That's the one. Now, Pluto is fantastic if you want to zone out and watch endless reruns of the Love Boat or old reality shows. But taking a massively expensive premium show like Strange New World and putting it on a linear Pluto channel where the viewer can't pause it, can't rewind it, and it is constantly interrupted by commercial break, it deeply annoyed the fan.
I bet. It feels like they were completely devaluing their own premium product. It's like serving expensive caviar on a soggy paper plate.
It's a great analogy. It was just a desperate move to fill airtime rather than treating the IP spec. And Ellison's stated goal is to completely stop that kind of amateur mishandling. He wants Paramount to evolve into the, quote, most technologically capable media company in the world.
And technologically capable means leveraging better AI, building smarter distribution pipelines, and aggressively cutting the fat.
Exactly. And when they say cutting the fat, we have to be clear, they do not just mean canceling a few sci-fi shows. They're talking about overhauling entire corporate divisions.
Right.
And there is a massive focus in this source material on...
This is a really critical piece of the puzzle here, especially when we start looking at the political climate surrounding this deal. Ellison actually wrote in his letter that transforming CBS News is absolutely essential because the industry is facing, quote, historic lows in media trust.
Historic lows, which is a very polite corporate way of saying that large portions of the public simply do not believe what they are seeing on traditional news broadcasts.
Right. And his stated goal to fix this is to build a modern digital age organization that is rooted strictly in, quote, facts and rigorous reporting. He's actually teasing that totally new news formats are coming in 2026.
And when you use a phrase like rooted in facts, it strongly implies that he believes the network has not been failing.
That is 100% the subtext there.
And it perfectly aligns with the broader political theory that our source dived later, the idea that there is a massive external desire to overhaul these legacies. It suggests a major pivot away from the current style of opinion-based journalism back to something harder, or at the very least something entirely different.
Okay, so that is the Paramount pitch in a nutshell. They're the accelerant, they're going to clean house, cut the fat, and rebuild the news. But Netflix isn't just sitting there dealing with a tough competitor, they are actively fighting a war on a second front against the federal government.
And this is exactly where the Clownfish TV analysis shifts story from a standard boardroom M&A drama into a full-blown political thriller. According to the source, Netflix is currently being absolutely grilled by the Department of Justice Antitrust.
The DOJ. That is never a fun meeting for a CEO.
Never. The DOJ is intensely examining whether Netflix would essentially become an illegal monopoly if they are allowed to acquire Warner Brothers.
Which makes sense on paper, right?
It does. If you combine Netflix's overwhelming global dominance in streaming distribution with Warner Brothers' historic dominance in actual production and IGN, you create an absolute... They would control the actual water pipes and the water flow.
It really sounds like the kind of massive vertical integration that probably would have gotten a rubber stamp from regulators 10 or 15 years ago. But the environment today is totally different.
The regulatory environment has completely hardened, but it's not just standard DOJ antitrust math at play here. The source material strongly suggests there is direct, immense friction between Netflix and the actual White House.
Which brings us to what the source ominously refers to as the visit. I just love how dramatic that sounds. Ted Sarandos, the co-CEO of Netflix, is physically going to the White House.
Yes, on a Thursday. He is flying to D.C. to have a face-to-face meeting directly with President Trump.
That feels like a massive desperation move. I mean, you do not go to the principal's office yourself unless you are in incredibly deep trouble or you need a historically massive favor.
It is entirely a desperation. The explicit agenda of this meeting is to discuss the Warner Brothers. Sarandos is trying to personally smooth over political tensions that have basically reached a boiling. He's trying to unstick the gears of...
But what kind of tensions are we really talking about? I mean, Netflix is fundamentally a tech and entertainment company. Trump is a politician. Where is the actual friction coming from?
According to the analysis, it is very multi-layered. First, there is friction regarding the actual content Netflix produced. The source specifically mentions conservative anger over what it terms, quote, gay cartoons on the platform. This type of programming has heavily alienated certain conservative critics and politicians.
Okay, so there's a culture war element to the content itself.
Yes. But the real firestorm, the thing that is actually threatening to blow up a multi-billion-dollar merger, is about personnel. Specifically, it is about
Susan Rice, the former high-level advisor in the Biden administration, currently sits on the Netflix board of directors, right?
She does. And her presence on that board has suddenly become the absolute flashpoint of this entire corporate war.
We really need to unpack this carefully because, according to the source, this seems to be the single issue that could stink the entire Netflix bid. President Donald Trump has explicitly demanded that Netflix fire Susan Rice from their board.
That is exactly what the report states. It is not a suggestion, it is a direct ultimatum from the White House. And it's important to note that it's not just because of her past affiliation with the Democratic Party. It is specifically because of very recent public comment.
What exactly did she say that triggered this?
Well, according to the Clownfish TV breakdown, Rice recently appeared as a guest on a pod. During that interview, she issued a very stark warning to major corporations, media outlets, and high-powered law. She warned them against, quote, bending the knee to Trump.
Bending the knee.
Yes. And she went further. She explicitly threatened consequence. She essentially said that if these corporations play ball with Trump now and then the Democrats eventually return to power, there would be, quote, revenge or severe retaliation.
Wow, that is incredibly intense. She's basically sending a mafia-style message to corporate America saying, if you cooperate with him today, we are going to remember it and punish you tomorrow.
Exactly. It was widely interpreted in political and business circles as a direct, undeniable threat to the corporate community. And as you can easily imagine, that rhetoric did not go over well with the sitting president.
I'm going to take a wild guess and say he didn't just ignore it.
Not even a little bit. Trump immediately took to Truth Social and posted a very public warning. He explicitly stated that if Susan Rice remains on the Netflix board, Netflix will, quote, pay the consequences.
Pay the consequences. I mean, when the President of the United States says a specific corporation is going to pay the consequences, that sounds like a direct threat to the actual survival of their business.
It absolutely is. And you have to view that threat in the context of the ongoing DOJ antitrust investigation we just talked about. If the DOJ is already on the fence looking for a valid legal reason to block this massive merger, having extreme political animosity raining down from the Oval Office creates an incredibly hostile environment.
Right. At that point, it's not just about the technical interpretation of antitrust law, and it becomes about the political will of the executive branch.
Exactly. So Ted Sarandos is walking into the White House trying to save the biggest acquisition in the history of his company, while the guy sitting across the desk is actively demanding he publicly fire a high-profile board member. That is a completely impossible position for a CEO.
It's the ultimate rock and a hard place. Think about it. If Sarandos caves to the pressure and fires Rice, he looks incredibly weak. He looks like he's allowing politicians to dictate his corporate board, which would immediately cause a massive internal revolt at Netflix because their employee base in California is largely very liberal.
Not to mention the intense anger he would face from the entire Democratic establishment.
Right. But if he refuses and he keeps her on the board, he almost certainly loses the Warner Brothers deal because the government will just throw red tape at it until it dies.
It is a lose-lose scenario for Netflix. And meanwhile, while Netflix is fighting this agonizing two-front war, Paramount is just cruising along, seemingly being best buddies with the current administration.
And that is the massive contrast the source analysis really highlights. The report describes Donald Trump as being, quote, good friends with the Ellison. Friends with the Ellison. That is incredibly convenient timing for Paramount.
It's much more than just convenience, though. It represents real, tangible political access. The source points out a specific visual that really drives this dynamic home. David Ellison recently appeared at the State of the Union address.
Really? Who was he sitting with at the State of the Union?
He was sitting in the gallery as the personal guest of Senator Lindsey Graham, who, as everyone knows, is a very close and powerful ally of President Trump.
Okay, let's just pause and look at the optics of that for a second. You have David Ellison, the guy trying to buy Warner Brothers, sitting comfortably in the VIP gallery at the State of the Union, surrounded by the president's top allies.
Right.
And on the exact same day, you have Ted Sarandos, his rival, getting hauled into DOJ for an antitrust grilling and getting directly threatened by the president on social media. The optics are nice.
And optics matter.
Yeah.
It sends a blindingly clear signal to the global market and, more importantly, to the Warner Brothers Board of Directors to vote on them. One of these paths is clearly paved with political favor and a green light from the other path is literally covered in regulatory landmines.
So if you were a major Warner Brothers shareholder looking to cash out, which path looks safer to you? It's a no-brainer.
Exactly. But there is another deeper layer to this whole Ellison connection that I want to touch on. The source material spends time unpacking a very specific theory regarding CNN.
Yes, the CNN theory. This is where the analysis moves from standard corporate maneuvering into something really fascinating and kind of Machiavellian.
It really is. Now, we all know that President Trump has let's call it a highly complicated historical relationship with CNN.
To put it very mildly, yes. He has spent years frequently referring to the network as, quote, fake news and framing them as a direct enemy of his political movement.
So the theory presented by the Clownfish TV source is that Trump actually desperately wants the Ellisons to win this bidding war, specifically because Warner Brothers owns CNN.
Wait, so the White House is picking a winner in a corporate merger just to change the ownership of a news channel?
That is the core of the speculation, yes.
Yeah.
The idea is that Trump fully expects the Ellisons to do to CNN exactly what they are already proposing Yes News.
Which, as we discussed earlier, is to, quote, reform it.
Reform it, restructure it, sell it off in pieces, or perhaps even just shut down the news division entirely. The source suggests that Trump firmly believes the Ellisons would be perfectly willing to completely dismantle the current editorial culture.
And rebuild it into something else.
Right, to rebuild it in a way that is far less hostile to his administration, or alternatively, to simply neutralize its cultural influence entirely by gutting its budget.
So from the perspective of the Trump administration, a Paramount victory isn't just a business outcome. It is a massive strategic political victory. It effectively places a major, historically hostile news network squarely into the hands of, quote, friends.
Precise. And if you believe that theory, it adds massive credence to the idea that immense political pressure is being deliberately applied behind the scenes to make it, quote, as hard as possible for Netflix to win.
Because it's suddenly not just about the economics of streaming anymore.
No, it becomes a battle over controlling the actual legacy media landscape. It's about ensuring that the next decade of political news coverage is managed by corporate leaders that the administration feels it can trust or at least negotiate.
Which brings us perfectly to the final major segment of this analysis. Yeah. And honestly, this is probably the most grim part of the whole report for the actual working class people in the entertainment industry. The source explicitly titles this dynamic, The Ellisons or Oblivion.
It is an incredibly stark. The Ellisons or Oblivion sounds like the title of a dystopian sci-fi movie. But for the thousands of people currently working on studio lots in Los Angeles, this is their actual real-world reality, right?
The core argument the source makes here is that Hollywood, which the analysis characterizes broadly as being, quote, far left in its politics, culturally despises the idea of the conservative-leaning Ellison family taking over their most legendary studio.
That's right. Culturally, the creative class in Los Angeles, writers, directors, actors, they align much more naturally with the progressive corporate values of a tech company like Netflix, or even the old traditional Warner. The Ellisons, on the other hand, represent a much more conservative, traditional business-first approach, something the source describes as being much more red state friendly, so there is an immediate massive clash of cultural values there.
But And this is the massive irony the source points out. Even though the creative class violently hates the politics of the Ellisons, the analysis argues that Paramount is actually Hollywood's best and maybe only bet for actual survival. Why is that?
Because of what the source calls the Netflix doesn't care argument.
Okay, let's break that argument down in detail. What exactly does Netflix not care about?
According to the Clownfish TV breakdown, Netflix has absolutely zero interest in three specific things that are the vital lifeblood of the traditional Hollywood ecosystem. Number 1, movie theaters. Number 2, physical media. And number 3, keeping legacy staff employed.
Let's take those one by one because they are all huge, starting with movie theaters.
Right. Netflix, at its core, is a tech subscription service. Their entire multi-billion-dollar business model relies entirely on keeping you sitting on your couch paying that monthly fee.
All right, they don't want you leaving the house.
Exactly. Because of that, they have historically shown almost zero interest in supporting wide traditional theatrical release. Occasionally, they will do a tiny limited run in a few theaters just to technically qualify a movie for an Oscar. But they are absolutely not in the business of trying to film multiplexes on a Friday night.
So if Netflix buys the Warner Brothers empire, the massive fear in the industry is that they will simply stop releasing the new Batman or Superman movies in actual theaters. They will just drop a $200 million blockbuster straight onto the app on a Tuesday.
Which effectively kills the traditional box office model overnight.
And if you kill the box office, you kill that shared cultural experience of a packed theater. Not to mention, you literally bankrupt the entire theater industry.
Yeah.
AMC, Regal, all of them. Okay, what about the second point, physical media? The Blu-rays, the 4K collector disc.
Netflix has absolutely no corporate infrastructure for physical media anymore. Remember, they completely phased out their original DVD mail server a long time ago. If they acquire the Warner library, the very real fear is that they will immediately stop printing physical discs. If you ever want to watch The Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, you are forced to subscribe to Netflix forever. You can no longer truly own.
That is an incredibly scary thought for film collectors and historical preservation. It means that if Netflix ever loses the rights to a movie, or if they just arbitrarily decide to edit or delete a controversial scene, the original version is just gone forever. You can't just pull the old disc off your shelf to watch the original cut.
Exactly. It creates the ultimate corporate walled garden. And then we get to the third and most devastating point for the industry, keeping the actual staff employed.
This is the big one that really hits the working class of L.
The source aggressively argues that Netflix's sole motivation in this entire bid is purely about acquiring the intellectual property. They just want the famous characters. They want Batman, they want Superman, they want Harry Potter. What they absolutely do not need is the thousands of people who currently work at Warner Bros. Netflix already has its own massive global marketing. They do not need Warner's marketing department. They do not need Warner's global distribution arm. They certainly don't need hundreds of middle managers on the lot.
So the translation there is, if Netflix officially wins this bidding,
massive, catastrophic, they will immediately shut down in-development projects. They will fire thousands of legacy staff. They will absorb the valuable IP into their servers, and they will quickly move on. The source refers to Netflix's attitude towards cinema history as purely paying, quote, lip service to the art. They might issue a press release saying how much they respect the legacy of Warner Brothers, but their actual corporate actions would be pure ruthless acts.
Okay, but if Paramount wins instead?
Well, to be fair, it is definitely not going to be a perfect paradise. There will still be significant job cuts. We already talked about Ellison's mandate to aggressively cut the fat and achieve operational efficiency.
Right, no more blank checks for singing Klingon.
Exactly. But fundamentally, Paramount is still a traditional Hollywood studio. They inherently like movie theaters. They still operate a massive global physical media distribution network. And crucially, they actually need human beings to run those legations. They still need a dedicated theatrical marketing team to put posters in lobbies.
So the brutal argument the source is making to Hollywood is basically this. You might end up getting a corporate boss whose conservative politics you absolutely despise, but at the very least, you will actually still have a job to go to on Monday morning.
That is exact. The quote is a more conservative culture, but at least there will be work. That is the agonizing dilemma facing the town. It is a terrible choice between ideological comfort and basic economic survival.
It is a brutal reality check for an industry that is used to getting its way. As the source says, there is, quote, no good ending. You either get the Silicon Valley corporate raider who fires everyone and deletes the culture, or you get the political rival who saves the studio but completely changes the culture.
And that is exactly why the specific word oblivion is used in the analysis. For the current established progressive culture of Hollywood, the way the business has been run for the last 20 years, a Netflix victory might actually be the literal end of the line.
Right.
A Paramount victory is definitely a painful change for them, but it's a lifeline. It keeps the physical lights turned on at the studio lot.
So Taking all of this in, what does this actually mean for the normal viewers, the people just sitting at home who want to watch a good movie or a decent TV show on a Friday night?
It means that the actual content you consume in 2027 and beyond is going to look completely different depending on which billionaire wins this boardroom fight today.
If Netflix pulls off a miracle and wins despite the government pressure, everything gets locked onto one single app. But maybe the traditional movie theater experience dies a little more every day. And maybe we stop seeing physical Blu-ray releases entirely. The whole world just gets a little more digital and a lot more rented.
Yes. And if Paramount wins, we might actually see a huge resurgence of the massive theatrical blockbuster experience. But we might also see a major shift in the actual kinds of stories being greenlit. A deliberate move away from what the source calls far left or experimental content towards something much more broad appeal, safe, or quote, centric.
And absolutely, definitely no more singing Klingons.
Oh, definitely no more singing Klingons. That era is...
You know, when we first started this deep dive today, I honestly thought we were just going to be talking about a dry M&A business, stock prices, and board vote. But this is just so much deeper than that.
It really is.
It's a battle over the actual definition of our pop culture. It is a terrifying look at the raw power of the White House to directly influence private business transactions. And fundamentally, it is about the literal survival of the Hollywood industry as we know.
We are essentially watching a high-speed collision between Wall Street stock prices and Washington political vendetta. It is $31 a share going up against a direct ultimatum from the president. It's the Department of Justice versus the power.
And the craziest part of all of this to me is that it really could all come down to just one single meeting. If Ted Sarandos walks out of the Oval Office this Thursday and decides, you know what, it's just not worth the headache. If he just walks away, the entire trajectory of global entertainment changes instantly.
That is a very distinct and real. The source analysis clearly notes that Sarandos might simply walk. The financial price, extreme political heat, little too high. He has to sit down and mathematically weigh the long-term value of owning Batman against the immediate cost of fighting a brutal public war with the President States.
So here is the final provocative thought I want to leave you, the listener, with today to mull over. Let's assume for a second that the Clownfish TV source is entirely right about where this is heading. Let's assume Netflix throws in the towel and walks away, and Paramount takes the reins of Warner Brothers.
Okay.
They come in with a strict mandate to heavily reform the news divisions at CNN and CBS. They come in with a strict mandate to ruthlessly cut underperforming experimental content. They want to be completely technologically capable and utterly efficient.
It paints a picture of a vastly different, much more conservative media landscape by the time we hit 2027.
Exactly. And it makes me wonder, are we currently watching the actual death of the blank check era of television? Because for the last decade, these streaming services basically just threw billions of dollars at creators and said, go make whatever crazy niche thing you want. Is that golden era officially over?
I really think it might be. If Paramount and the Ellisons win this, it strongly signals a harsh return to the old school way of doing Hollywood. Return on investment actually matters again.
Right.
Mass four-quadrant appeal matters again. The recent era of highly niche, incredibly expensive experimental content funded by endless cheap tech debt might be officially dead and buried. We might be entering the era of extreme physical discipline in Hollywood.
And if that is true, the so-called golden age of television might be rapidly transitioning into the age of efficiency. Whether that results in better art or worse art, well, that is really up to you to decide.
It certainly is.
Well, that is a wrap for today's deep dive into the massive battle for Warner Brothers. It is an incredibly fast developing story and things are moving by the minute. But at least now you know what is actually happening behind the sanitized corporate headline.
Indeed. Keep a very close eye on the stock ticker this week. And honestly, maybe keep an eye on Truth Social too.
Yeah.
Because in this bizarre landscape, you never know exactly where the next multi-billion-dollar come from.
Very true. Thanks for listening, everyone. We will catch you on the next deep dive.